You're a writer.
All right. Once again, here I am, hopefully without any interruptances. Please take your seats. Hope you're ready for our next presenter, our next speaker, who's really Mr. Worldwide. A guy who traveled all over the world and who's given us a presentation titled Start an Agency and Plan a Successful Exit Strategy. Well, why is that? I was wondering why he traveled the world. I guess his strategy is scam people, and once they're into his scam, he has an exit strategy. He's been living in Croatia for quite some time. They haven't figured out his scam yet. What is his scam? How does he scam people? He's going to tell us about it. I asked Tony, where did you get this guy? How did he come to Split? And Tony was like, yeah, well, he got on a boat from Africa to Italy and he missed Italy and landed in Croatia. His name is Prashant Vaz. He comes from, well, all over. He lived in Spain, Africa, UK, all over the world. You cannot guess his origin, but maybe he'll tell us a secret or two about his scams. Please give him a warm welcome. A big round of applause for Prashant Vaz.
Good evening, everyone. Unfortunately, I'm not going to tell you none of my scams because then I can't rip anyone off, but I've got something much more interesting to talk about today. So before I get started, I'm going to quickly introduce myself. My background is in software engineering. I've pretty much spent the past 20 years in the IT industry, and I would say I've been at both ends of the spectrum. I worked as a contractor for a good proportion of my career for BigTech, mainly finance and insurance. And on the other half, well, I pretty much was setting up businesses and scams, like he said. So, yeah, that being said, what I've done is I've prepared the presentation today, which is my personal journey on how I managed to start an agency when I was 16 years old and basically sold it before I was 20. So, well, once they fix it. I heard that. So what I've done today is I've divided this presentation, well, when it loads, into 5 different sections. The first section is basically going to cover what was going on in my head, what triggered me to start my own business when I was that age. I'm then going to move on and discuss how I built the business, how I scaled it, how I managed it, and finally how I sold it. The last 2 points I'm going to talk about are obviously lessons that I learned during this journey. And while some of them are personal, hopefully you find a couple of things in there that resonate with you. So without further ado, let's crack on. So it all started off when I was 15 years old. I lived in a very similar environment to Split, in an island in Spain. There was not that many opportunities around me and I just wanted a bit of extra cash. So I figured out, well, there's no point working locally. The opportunities aren't very good, they're very scarce. So I started exploring online, and at this point, this whole Web 2.0 thing was kicking off, very similar to what's occurring today with Web 3.0 and crypto. So what I did was I basically taught myself how to code. I learned some HTML, some CSS, and after a couple of months, I said to myself, right, I need to start figuring out a way on how to monetize this. So what I ended up doing was I ended up going on a job board. Back then, I believe it was called Elance. And there were quite a few private individuals, agencies that basically needed a bit of help with front-end development. I decided to apply to some of these jobs, and I was quite fortunate enough to have one person that decided to obviously take a punt and try me out. And yeah, I remember doing that first job, putting all my blood and sweat into it, making sure it was as good as perfect, and delivered it to my first customer way ahead of schedule, and he seemed quite impressed with what I did. He came back and said to me, you know what, do you want some more work? And it was something that I didn't really expect, but I was happy he gave me the opportunity. At that point, I started to realize, right, I think I've actually got something that I can monetize over here. And I decided to sort of carry on going on Elance, finding more jobs, and just kind of doing as much as I can to increase my income. But it obviously got to a stage where I realized that there's only a limited amount of time I've got. I've only got two hands, unfortunately, and I can't really do all that work. So that's when I decided I need to stop thinking like freelancer and start thinking more like a businessman. And I had to start putting things into place and structuring things. So when I started, it was actually quite simple. I started off with a simple landing page, and it didn't really have much on it. It was nothing too fancy. It had a shitty little logo that I copied off someone, I remember, and literally just had information about what I did, a bit of information on pricing, and a contact form. What happened later on was, once I set up the website, I realized that actually no one was visiting it. I wasn't really getting that many orders through it, and I needed to somehow get people to know what I'm doing, what my company has to offer. So I started going on some forums, very similar to what some people now do on Quora. But what I was doing was I specifically went on technical forums and I started answering questions and helping people solve technical issues. And the whole objective of doing that was to establish some form of authority and to kind of show people that, hey, I know what I'm talking about. I'm not talking shit. I'm really good at what I do. And if you need any help, well, I'm the man, basically. I then moved on as well to kind of go into other forums that were basically marketplaces, and just think of them as something like Craigslist or Gumtree, where you just basically post a thread and you have information about the company, provide information about what services you provide, and a little bit of information on how to get in touch with us. And that actually seemed quite primitive at the time, and it seemed to work well. I then realized that, you know what, I'm not happy with that amount of money I'm making, and I wanted to push it more. So what I ended up doing was, back then they weren't really called influencers, but I'd identified certain people that had a large following, and they had their own websites and blogs. So what I did was I got in touch with those people and said, hey, I've read your blog. It seems like your target audience pretty much would be interested in the service that I have to offer. If I chuck you some money, could you just do a review on me and review my company? And most of them were quite happy with it. And they basically done a review. I started getting more traffic. I was building up my backlinks to my website, started getting more organic traffic coming in. It was really, really good. But me being the person I am, I wanted to push it more and kind of make more money, really. So what I ended up doing was I then moved on to identifying certain niches. So my target audience was basically designers and creatives, people that did not have the technical expertise to pull off what I was pulling off. So yeah, I found these sources, stuck some ads onto them, and to my surprise, they actually turned out to be really, really good, and the revenue started coming in. Another thing that I noticed as well during this time while I was building the business was that I had a lot of agencies, so a lot of corporate firms that would outsource some of the work to me. And I wanted to increase that revenue as well and get them to send me more work. So I basically started to talk to them, figuring out how the business operated, how many people worked for them, all that kind of stuff, just to get to know them more on a personal level. And when I did that, I basically figured out an angle on how I could potentially pitch my services to them and get some more work from them, essentially. And that seemed to work quite well. So that literally covers the business side of things and the market side of things. There's obviously the operational aspect, which I'm going to be discussing next. So as I said before, I started off with a very simple website. The next step was to kind of have something that was a bit more professional, something which answered the questions that people were asking, and there were quite a lot of processes as well which weren't very streamlined. So this whole thing was done manually from my bedroom at 15 years old. I would be communicating with the clients, sending them invoices, dealing with my staff, dealing with revision requests. It started to get a bit overwhelming. So there's quite a lot of things that I can talk about in terms of how I optimize the process, but in order to keep things simple, I'm just going to talk about the order management system. So essentially what I did was I figured out a way on how to automate how the orders came in, how they were managed. And back then, the technology wasn't as mature as it was now. So I had to use an external tool called Basecamp. Essentially what would happen is as soon as an order would come in through the website, it would go into Basecamp. And from Basecamp, I could be able to track which worker was working on the order, what states the order was in. And I just had a very good overview of what was going on in my business without having to go through all my emails and that kind of stuff. And finally, you're probably wondering, well, if you're getting all this work, how is a 15 or 16-year-old managing to pull all this off? What I actually ended up doing was I started hiring remote developers back in 2007. It wasn't really a thing back then, and I didn't know whether it was going to work out, but luckily I managed to pull it off, and I got quite a lot of good feedback, and I managed to actually get quite a few good people working for me. So moving on. Once I had this whole thing set up and I had everything running, I decided to move out of Spain and go to the UK. And the whole purpose of doing this was to basically study, although to be honest, I didn't do much of that over there. And yeah, it got to the point where I wouldn't say I lost passion for the business, but my level of commitment wasn't the way it was when I initially started out. I realized I was getting a lot of distracted. I think the fact that I switched to a different environment, I was meeting new people, it was a little bit challenging. So I literally had two options. And those two options were I either sort myself out and I get this thing back on track, or alternatively, I'll get rid of the business. Now, deep down, when I started this, I knew I was going to sell it at some point. I just didn't want to sell it at the stage where it actually got sold. I wanted to build it up a bit more, grow it a little bit bigger, and potentially get a better valuation for it. However, I ended up deciding to actually sell the business. And that was actually quite interesting because the first thing that I did was I was thinking, right, fuck, how do I get rid of this? So what I did was I approached one of the competitors back then, one of the biggest competitors in my field. And I sent them an email. I think this was at night time. I basically said to them, hey, this is my name, this is what I do, this is what my company does. You've probably seen me around. We advertise in the similar places. Would you be interested in acquiring the business? And to my surprise, the following day, they obviously got back to me and they suggested to set up a call and to discuss what the business was about and obviously run them through the financials. So next day, jumped on a call, had a discussion with them, didn't really get much feedback from them. And for those of you that know me, you know I'm a very anxious person, I'm very impulsive, and sometimes I can be extremely impatient. So them next 3 days actually felt like 3 fucking years. It was so long. But finally, one morning I woke up, I saw that email, I saw the offer, I saw the letter of intent, and it was probably one of the best days of my life. So that's pretty much how I got rid of it. And during that time, once I sold it, I obviously had time to reflect and to think what were the things that I did good and what things I'm going to take on with me and sort of implement in another venture, and what were the things that I needed to work on. So when this thing works, it's not working. All right, I'll try and remember it. So going back to it, so let's start off with the things that I needed to work on. One of the things that really frustrated me was, and to be honest, I didn't do really well at a young age, was managing expectations. So I was extremely committed to my business. It's something that I was really passionate about, something that I really enjoyed doing. But unfortunately, the people that worked for me, well, they had other priorities in life, and I couldn't expect them to be as on it as I was. And if I had known that from a young age, it would have saved me a lot of frustration. The second thing that I think I needed to work on is me being the impulsive person I am. I only went out and got an offer from one person. What I should have done, I should have emailed more competitors, and I should have got a different offer from other people. I would have maybe got a better deal, who knows? But at the same time, I was also in the UK, and again, I didn't leverage what I had around me. I had a community, I had a tech hub around me. It's not something that I had in Spain, but it's something that I did have in the UK. And yeah, that's something that I should have used, and something that I should have kind of gone out there, explored, had a conversation with a few more people to kind of figure out how they've done this in the past, and what's attractive, and what would be an attractive deal, and what essentially would not be an attractive deal. And the third thing, which I don't remember because this thing doesn't work, I'll come back to it later. But anyways, moving on to the positive stuff. Moving on to the positive stuff. One thing that I did extremely well with this business was I was specialized and I was focused on a niche. So it was very easy for me to identify my customers. It was very easy for me to pitch to people. It was very easy for me to basically have a conversation with people and try to explain to them the value that I had. And the only way I could have done that was because I was so specialized, and I wasn't one of them companies that does everything, that does web development, web app design, mobile design. I mean, if you pay them to do something, they'll probably do it. But I was very focused on one thing, and that's pretty much what I did. I also happen to be quite a stubborn person, and I never take no for an answer. So that definitely helped a lot with sales. I would simply never take no for an answer. If someone said to me no, I'd figure out, well, there must be another angle around this. There must be some way I can convince this person. But it was just some people could not see the value in what I was offering. And you know what? That's perfectly fine. At the end of the day, the way I see it is this is just a numbers game. I kind of moved on, started interacting with more people, more businesses, and started asking them to see or figuring out whether they would be interested. So yeah, as soon as someone said no to me, I'd pretty much move on to someone else. The next thing that I did correctly was, I mean, this is kind of very obvious, and the fact that it's so obvious, I think it's very overlooked because people tend to complicate things, and that is just be different and be unique, and it doesn't really have to be that complicated. So the way I smashed it with this company was, there's two sides to the market, or two sides to the business. You've got the supply side and you've got the demand side. So let's discuss the demand side. That's what attracts your customers. That's what attracts your prospects. My pricing was very clairvoyant. It was very simple. Whereas all my competitors, it was extremely complicated. They would have a base price, and once you start adding on all the extras, essentially you would be paying a very high price for something that was just about industry standard. So when you compare apples for apples, my one might look a bit more expensive, but the fact is mine's got more value. The next thing that I did correct as well was from the supply side of things, which was basically trying to attract the right talent. Back in 2007, I mean, as a 15, 16-year-old, I didn't really have much choices. I mean, hell, I didn't even have a bank account. What I did was I opened up a PayPal account on my dad's name, and I was using that to receive money and obviously pay all my suppliers and the people that were working for me. So what I did was, I just started looking for guys that were working abroad and who were interested in remote work, were interested in something flexible. And essentially I built a team. At its point, it was about, I would say, 10 people. And everyone, obviously, some guys had full-time jobs. Some guys were just doing this on the side to earn a bit of extra money. Some of them were just freelancing. It was quite a flexible arrangement, both from my end and from their end. And you know what? It just worked. Another thing that I did really, really well was I really focused on trying to find the customers that are giving me repeat business, and trying to get to know them more on a personal level, and trying to figure out how the business works and how I can potentially engage more with them and increase the amount of sales and orders that we're pushing through to them. I actually had a few more things, but I don't remember, unfortunately. So I'm just going to crack on and move on to the next part of the talk. So to conclude, I want to end with a little personal story. For those of you that actually know me, know how I ended up here, but for those of you that don't know me, well, you're soon going to find out. So in 2008, I was on a hiring spree, and I posted a job on this website called Authentic Jobs, which actually still happens to be around quite impressively. And yeah, someone applied to that job. That someone was from Croatia, specifically Split, and he actually happens to be sitting here in this audience right now. So yeah, long story short, I sold the business. After a year, this guy messages me out of the blue and just starts chatting to me on a social one. No interest, no agenda regarding business. And as we started talking a bit more and more, and by the way, maybe I should say who he is. It's actually Tony Trivkovic. We started talking more and more, and at one point the guy was like, I think you should come to Croatia. And I was thinking in my head, nah, fuck that, man. That sounds long. And then this question kept coming up. I wouldn't say it was persistent, but it did come up a few times. Then I started thinking, I had some dodgy thoughts in my head. I was like, is this guy a creep? Is this guy gonna put me on a ship and take me to Lastovo and throw me in a bush and start fucking raping me or something? Like, I don't know who this guy is. So I said to myself, nah, man, you know what? I need to be a bit more open-minded about this. And just to clarify, not about getting raped by Tony, about coming to Croatia. So I decided to take the punt. I came to Croatia for 2 days. I met Tony, fortunately, and he seemed to be like a very normal guy. So I was very, very pleased, and obviously went back to the UK fully intact. After that, we started building a friendship. He would come to London more often. I would start coming to Croatia more often. And then his propaganda started. The famous Tony Trivkovic propaganda. When are you moving to Split? When are you moving to Croatia? It's not happening, mate. It's not happening. But eventually, after multiple years of coming here, and each time of me coming here and staying here for an extended period of time, I came back here, I think it was last August, if I'm not mistaken. And I came here for 2 weeks, and this was just after the COVID lockdown had finished. And I was thinking of London. I was thinking, oh, you know what? The place that I fell in love with is not really the same anymore. It's actually quite dead. In addition to that, I was also planning on changing up my career. I actually wanted to quit the IT sector. Personally, I had enough of it. And I said to myself, fuck it, you know what? I'm just going to move out here. So I literally went back to London, me being the impulsive person I am. I got rid of everything within 2 months. And here I am in October. And I've been here since. So when I think about this whole journey, and I think that shit started off as a 15-year-old in some island in Spain, and I think of the odds, because I'm a numbers guy, the probabilities were actually stacked against me, but it still ended up happening. Well, that should be it. I hope you enjoyed it. And yeah, if anyone's got any questions, feel free to catch me afterwards. Hi there.